Welcome to Then and Now, a podcast by the UCLA Luskin Center for History and Policy. We study change in order to make change, linking knowledge of the past to the quest for a better future. Every other week, we examine the most pressing issues of the day through a historical lens, helping us understand what happened then and what that means for us now.
Welcome to Then and Now. I'm David Myers. Today, we will be speaking of the political earthquake of Donald Trump's return to the White House as the 47th President of the United States. Many were shocked by the decisiveness of Trump's victory and the Republican sweep of the House, Senate, and presidency. How could this have come about, especially after the apparent stalling of Trump's momentum in the 2020 and 2022 midterm elections? What historical trend lines were pronounced? What key constituencies made a difference? To help us address these questions and explain how the election turned out as it did, we're delighted to welcome back to Then and Now one of the country's most insightful observer of presidential politics, Lynn Vavreck. Lynn is the Marvin Hoffenberg Professor of American Politics and Public Policy at UCLA, and she has written authoritatively about electoral politics in the United States. With her co-authors, she has written 3 books on the past 3 presidential elections: The Gamble, Choice and Chance in the 2012 presidential election, Identity Crisis, the 2016 presidential campaign and the battle for the meaning of America, and The Bitter End, the 2020 presidential campaign and the challenge to American democracy. There's no better guide to chart how we got where we went on November 5th, 2024 than Lynn Vavreck. Welcome to Then and Now, Lynn.
Thank you.
So let us jump right in. Were you surprised by the results of the recent presidential election?
I was a little surprised. I anticipated the election would be close, and it was close, but I thought it would be so close that we would, at midnight Pacific, still be wondering what the outcome was. And the fact that the outcome was clear very early in the evening was surprising to me.
Why was that?
Well, I think back, since we're on then and now, let's go to the then. I think back to 2016 and how few votes would have had to have changed in order for that outcome to be different. 77,000 votes across 3 states. Then I think to 2020 and 33,000 votes across 3 states would have flipped that outcome. And I didn't see a lot of changes in the kinds of worlds that the 2 parties want to build or the orientation of voters toward those worlds. And so I expected that this election would be at least as close as the previous 2, if not closer, because of some of the ways in which the electorate has been moving between the parties. And it was still close. It's 100 and maybe like 70,000 votes across 3 states, objectively close, but not as close as the previous 2.
Yeah, I want to get back to why that is, but I also am grateful that you mentioned and reminded us of the importance of history. I mean, you have charted in your work very carefully the arc of presidential politics really over the last 12 years. You wrote a book on the 2012 presidential election, and then you wrote 2 books that deal with the 2016 and 2020 elections. So you and your colleagues are leading experts on the political career of Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. What's that arc look like from 2016 to the present? What are the sort of big structural shifts or continuities that are important for us to keep in mind?
Well, again, because history matters, I'm going to push us back 1 cycle. So let's start in 2012. So between 2012 and 2016, that's when we see a big change. So that 2016 election is, in my mind, the beginning of a new period in American politics. It's very hard to know that you're living through like fundamental change when you're living through it. But I'm here to tell you, I think that we are living through it. So 2016 is the moment where the landscape of American politics changes. Before that, for most of, for everyone who's listening, for most of their lives, American politics was contested over New Deal issues. So since the 1930s, the role and size of government, should government be helping people, relief, recovery, what should the tax rate be? What should government's role be in your life? This is sort of the difference between it being 1930 and it being 2030, right? We are a quarter of the way through the 21st century, and people are still thinking about American politics like it's 1930. The New Deal landscape of American politics is over. And in 2016, that's the beginning of it. Donald Trump comes down that escalator and he says, this election is going to be contested over identity-inflected policies, not identity politics, right? Not identity politics, identity policies. Who gets to claim membership in our national community? And our policies are going to determine that. A wall on the border, a religious test to enter the country. So once we're fighting about those things and he wins that election, there's no reason for he or his party to go back to fighting on the old playing field. They are winning, and in 2020, almost winning, and in 2024, winning again. They are winning or almost winning every presidential election since that pivot. And so there's no reason for them to abandon this. So this is the new dimension of conflict in American politics. And it reorients the electorate.
Okay, I want to go back and just raise 2 points related to the historical account you just offered. So one thing you said is that our understanding or the party's understanding of the role of government changes. And when I think of that, I think of what I often call the Second American Revolution, which is the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, and sort of the reimagining of government as a grave evil that afflicts American society, and regulation being its most pernicious symptom.
Yes.
So there's a big change that occurs there. How does that figure in the sort of new culture of identity policies that you're talking about? Because it seems there's a longue durée perspective, a longer perspective, or a longer bend of the arc that might begin with the Reagan Revolution.
Well, I think there are some things about those 1980s that are relevant to thinking about the 2020s and 2030s. The deregulation I don't often think about, but I think you're right that like dismantling big government, and Reagan's got that great line, what is everyone's most feared sentence? Don't worry, I'm here from the federal government and I'm here to help, right? That's important for understanding, where we are now in 2024. But the other parallel, I think, is the Reagan Revolution in terms of the moral majority push. So after the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement, we sort of get through the 1970s. Southerners are sorting themselves. We're not Democrats anymore. We're going to call ourselves Republicans and vote for Republicans. All of that is happening through the 70s. And we get to the 1980s. And then this new dimension gets introduced, this moral dimension. And the point I want to make is that that's a very different exercise from what Trump does in 2015. In the 1980s, Republicans said, we believe in a two-parent household. We believe in marriage. We do not think divorce is good for American society. They had views about lesbian and gay populations. They had a lot of views about the family. And in terms of like divorce, for example, or single-parent households, they weren't going to legislate. They weren't going to write policy on those things. They were saying this is about morality, not about policy. Divorce is bad. Single-parent families, bad. In 2015, and what we're doing now is different from that because we're writing policies about immigration, about religion, about who gets to use which bathroom and who gets to play on what sports teams. Those things need to be regulated by some form of institution. And so that's really different from the moral majority arguments.
In fact, it reflects, in some sense, a renunciation of the small government theme of Reagan, because what you're talking about is a very activist government role in shaping cultural policy.
Well,
No,
it's so interesting because, you know, I think that conservatives, as much as they wanted government, leave me alone, really did on the moral compass stuff, think that the golden rule, what the role of government was to talk about that golden rule, or, sort of social and cultural norms. But this is even slightly different from that. It's out of necessity that we have to write something down on bathrooms, for example, because we all go places. We go to public places, and we work at a public university, and there are restrooms, and we will have to use them. And somebody has to say which one I can use and which one you can use. And so it's out of necessity, I think, that these policies are coming for us. And on this dimension, for example, on trans policy, public opinion on this is lopsided. And it is lopsided in the Republican direction.
Mhm.
And that is why Donald Trump got such traction from the ad that he ran late in the campaign in 2024. Kamala Harris is for they, them.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is for you.
Right.
It's lopsided. And until public opinion isn't lopsided on this, it's going to be challenging for the Democratic Party to gain much traction on these issues. But the issues are not going away.
Right. So it's so helpful, your framing of that vector from the moral majority, and yet sort of the way in which the role of government changes in sort of the Trump revolution. But I'm curious to know how that vector of religious conservatism meets up with another vector, which is a vector that affirms the United States as a white country. And you mentioned the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of the mid-1960s, which Martin Luther King said, with absolute clarity, will induce a backlash. And so I'm wondering whether that vector of race that I assume was present and a potent force in the developments that you've charted from 2016, to what extent was that vector propelled by the post-Obama backlash?
Yes, it's very important. I think about this period of time, to go back to your initial question about what are the trends. This period of time from 2012 to 2024 is a period of time in which the politics of race and ethnicity is simplified for people. And that's just the easiest way to understand it. How does that happen? It happens because Barack Obama was elected president. And believe it or not, a lot of people in America didn't really understand that the Democratic Party was historically a party that wanted to help Black Americans. And when Barack Obama is elected president, that's a massive dose of information, especially for non-college educated voters. Oh, the Democratic Party is the party that wants to help Black Americans. Aha, that's a huge updating moment. And the second moment then is the Trump candidacy in 2015. Again, simplifying the politics of race and ethnicity, and in this case, possibly also religion. He's just going to say out loud the parts that other candidates had been saying in their heads. It is, people have these attitudes. He's not creating them, but he is saying it's okay to talk out loud about how America was great back at this moment in time when there were more people who looked like me in America and fewer people who look like all these newcomers. And they're getting a lot of benefits. You're not anymore. Something's wrong with this. And once he gives sort of a megaphone and says, it's okay to talk about this out loud in your communities, that's hugely simplifies the politics of race, ethnicity, and religion for people.
Right. I want to, of course, get to the 2024 election, but you've charted the trajectory of Donald Trump too, and you've just given us important insight into his success. I mean, it reminds me of what the extremist Israeli-American rabbi and political figure Meir Kahane, who was elected to the Knesset before he was banned from running the Knesset, said to his constituents, which is, I say what you think. I say what you dare not give public expression to. So that's a really key, it sounds like that's a really key element in understanding Donald Trump and what makes him so successful and immune to the normal pressures and constraints that can fell other politicians.
There's a really interesting quote by one of the sort of grandfathers of Madison Avenue, an advertising guy from the 1960s and 70s. His name is Tony Schwartz. And he did all sorts of, he made the Daisy ad, if people know that ad.
9, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
And he said the goal of any messenger who is trying to, quote unquote, persuade people to do something is not persuasion, because persuasion is hard. Your actual goal, and his quote is, to put people to work for you. And the claim is the only way that you can put people to work for you is if you already know what they think and what their reaction will be if you nudge them. And so that's exactly what Trump did. He understood that these attitudes were out there. So, by the way, did Mitt Romney, so did John McCain. But both of those Republicans were running against Barack Obama. And they were not willing to talk about race. They did not want to win those elections by playing the race card, so to speak. And we could have a long conversation about whether they were successful in not doing that. But certainly compared to Trump, they did it less. And, Trump just doesn't care about that. And he's going to put those attitudes to work for him because he knows, just like in your example, he knows what people are thinking.
So how does Trump himself evolve? What does Trump 20 have that Trump 2016 doesn't have? And what does Trump 24 have that the earlier Trump didn't? Is there an evolution of any sort? Is it just the zeitgeist changes, the spirit of the time changes, he remains the same?
I think there's not much evolution. I think in 2016, he barely wins. In 2020, I mean, again, let's not complicate it. He loses because of COVID. If there had not been a global pandemic, I think it's pretty safe to say Donald Trump would have been reelected in 2020. So he loses because of COVID, but he's like the same guy. He governed exactly as he campaigned. People thought, oh, he's going to get to the White House. He's going to have this moment where, something's going to change. No. Campaigned again in 2020. Blue state governors want to keep you locked down. They care more about this set of people than about you and your, so again, all about polarization and identity-inflected policies. And then in 2024, let's just call that what it is too. It's the second COVID election, and the Democrats lose because of the inflation that is the product of all of the support that the government gave to people and businesses and landlords and farmers and everyone else, coupled with the supply chain problems. And there you are. And Donald Trump's the same guy. So I think there's not a lot of evolution there.
Right. And he asks that most lethal of questions in American presidential politics. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And the answer for so many people was no. And the Democrats failed to formulate a message that could take stock of the fact that Joe Biden saved the global economy. And in fact, the economic markers today are all positive. None of that landed.
I mean, that is a complicated message to deliver, right? Like Trump's message in 2024, really, it's so simple. And like newsflash, it's true. I think that people don't understand how much those stimulus checks changed a lot of people's disposable income in 2020. For a lot of households in the country, that was a significant increase in disposable income. And so when people look back and say, wow, I had so much more money when Donald Trump was president, like I could go buy things, I could take a trip. That's true for most people. That is not wrong. So what's complicated about it is, of course, then Kamala Harris wants to say, point number one, that's only true because the government gave you money. And that was because of a global pandemic. Thing number two, we in the Biden White House managed the aftermath of that in a way that meant that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. It's like we're running it's the counterfactual stupid campaign, right? It's impossible. That's impossible messaging. So, it's, yes, all the economic indicators are in the right direction for Harris, but it's like 1992. That was a jobless recovery. And it opened the door just enough for Bill Clinton to be able to come in and say the thing that everybody says now, it's the economy, stupid. People think that that meant that in 1992, the economy was in the dumper. It wasn't. We were coming out of the recession. All the indicators were in the right direction. Growth, we had monster growth, but the recovery was jobless and people didn't feel it. And what Clinton actually said was, we need change versus more of the same. And it's the economy, stupid. We need a new economy for the 21st century. And I'm going to be the bridge to the 21st century. The newness has to be about a new economy. He wasn't saying, just look at where you are. The economy sucks. It was much more nuanced than that. And this is the same thing. The indicators are in the right direction, but this is inflation instead of jobs. And people don't feel it. It's hard. It's hard if you can't, you've got a booming economy, but people are like, one woman said to George H.W. Bush on the campaign trail in 1992, I feel like you're telling me it's Christmas, but I look under the tree and there are no presents. And that's the same thing. Like, you can tell me it's Christmas all you want, but there's nothing under the tree.
Yeah. In a minute, I want to ask you about whether there was some way for the Democrats to avoid this train wreck, which in retrospect seems so obvious. But to get there, I want to ask about 2022, which was widely interpreted, at least in the first round of interpretations, as kind of a breaking of the Trump fever. Like, yep, we got it. But, there's a new analysis that says, oh no, the fundamentals of 2022 are quite similar to the fundamentals of 2024. How do you see 2022? What is it? What did it tell you?
So the midterm elections are rarely a function of the nation's economy. So that's the first thing. They are not turning on national economic conditions. They are much more related to, for example, the president's approval rating. Okay, but 2022 was unexpected, no matter what you think the historical drivers of midterm elections are. And, I think that there needs to be a bit of work on sorting through this, but I suspect that because the overturning of Roe was so new at that moment in time, and states were putting policies in place that were restrictive, that increases the salience of abortion as an issue for a lot of people. Nobody knows where the new equilibrium is going to be. Okay, so maybe that affects turnout, maybe that affects some people's vote choice. But fast forward 2 years to 2024, and the equilibrium has sort of started to emerge that, even in places like Kansas, it's not going there are not going to be policies that say abortion is always illegal. And so the new equilibrium, we now know where that's likely to be. And so maybe that changes the context for people. This is pure speculation. I don't have evidence on this, but I think that it is a plausible explanation. Just the newness of that Supreme Court ruling in 2022 was a real shock.
Right. And it's also surprising, perhaps verging on shocking, that many voters split their votes in 2024, voting to overturn abortion bans and yet vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about this. And one thing is, let's just people love to talk to me about these people who call themselves Republicans who are misaligned with the Republican Party on abortion. So they're pro-choice, or they think abortion should be legal in some circumstances. Let's just be more specific. But they call themselves Republicans. And people think okay, these people, they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. And my first reaction is, these people are not going to vote for Kamala Harris, because if abortion policy were something that were really important to them, they wouldn't be Republicans. They are misaligned with their party on this issue, but the issue is not that important to them. People are allowed to care about what they want to care about. And for those people, they don't care very much about that policy. But if you give them a separate line on the ballot where they're voting basically, and just do you think it should be legal in some circumstances or not? Well, if I'm not trading off anything else and I get to say, yes, I think that, I'm going to say, yes, I think that. But then at the presidential level, I'm not going to cast my ballot for Harris because I care a lot more about a whole bunch of other issues that if she's in the White House, she's going to build this world I don't want to live in. And so I can't vote for her. Right. So it's everybody thinks that there's a set of issues and all voters, their recipe that makes up their vote must be the same. 1 cup of the economy, a half a cup of, immigration. And no, everybody's recipe is different. And some people only have 1 thing in it. Some people have 15 things in it, but they're all aligned. Some people have 15 things in it, and it's a mix of liberal and conservative things. In fact, most people fall in that category. So it matters what it is that is at the top of your recipe.
Right. And it seems that we agree, and you are indeed the expert on this, that at the top of that recipe list in 2024 was the economy. And I wonder, if you were advising the Democratic Party in this election cycle, what would be an effective message, given A, that people felt great pain owing to inflation, B, the stimulus was necessary to save the economy, C, people like Larry Summers predicted high inflation rates, D, inflation rates have come down, as have interest rates, unemployment is low, those economic markers are good. Saying all those things doesn't really fit into a 30-second ad.
Yeah.
So what might have Democrats done better in messaging and sort of feeling the pain of Americans, but also pointing to these upward trends.
Yeah. It was such a profound uniform shift from 2020 to 2024 away from the Democratic Party. That for me, that indicates, and what I mean by that is that Kamala Harris lost vote share in almost every state and almost every county relative to what Biden did in 2020. Okay, now I did just say that like some of that is a reequilibration after COVID, and I think that's true. But that uniform shift suggests to me that there was something nationwide happening everywhere that is driving people away from the Democratic Party between 2020 and 2024. And the simplest explanation is, as you just said, the economy. And it's pretty hard knowing now what we know about how it went. It's pretty hard to think of messaging your way out of that. I think if you were going to try to do it, if you knew how it was going to go on election night in, March of 2024, you would build an entire campaign around, what Hillary Clinton called in 2016 average Americans. They ended up not liking that language because people thought that was an insult. But, not just working class, whatever that means now, but, people in the middle of of household income. And, you're going to these towns, you're sitting down with these people so that all of the images of you are with people. And at least I think what that accomplishes is people are going to draw the inference that you understand them because you've spent all of your time with them. And, there was a lot of great things. The Harris campaign, I can't say they made a single misstep. They had 100 days and they came in and it's like one of the best debate performances ever. And, the opportunity economy idea and messaging was good. Like they really, really nailed it. They were in a really tough context. And if they had had 300 days instead of 100 days, maybe they would have done some of these more contextual things. But it's pretty hard to overcome, the fact that 70% of people think the country's on the wrong track. You're not going to message your way out of that.
Yeah. How did the Trump campaign do?
Well, I mean, Trump's in a hard spot too, because, he complained when they replaced Biden with Harris, and everybody thought like, oh, that's just him, being grumpy. But no, like that's a legitimate problem for him as a campaign, right? They had this whole strategy. I don't want to call it a strategy. They had a whole path that they were on when Biden was the nominee. Biden was not talking about the economy at all. He was talking about democracy is on the ballot, the soul of the nation, fight for this country. He was not talking about the economy. And so Trump said, well, I'm going to talk about it. Like, if he's not going to claim his good economy, I'll claim my good economy and I'll call this economy shit, right? So that's what he was doing. And then 100 days from the election, all of a sudden, different opponents.
Yeah.
And guess what? She has come over to exactly where you are, and she is stealing your message. She is saying the exact same thing. I'm going to build you a better economy, and here's how I'm going to do it. And she's got like real policies she's talking about. And why that's bad for Trump is that if your opponent takes exactly the same position as you're going to split the votes. You don't want to split the votes. Let's go back to Tony Schwartz. You got to put people to work for you. You have to be on the winning side of something that you make more important. So in that moment where like he wakes up one day and all of a sudden his opponent is now saying the same thing he's saying, like he has a choice to make. And they did a smart thing. They pivoted pretty much instantly back to identity-inflected politics. And They leaned in on the border and on crime, and the Biden-Harris White House didn't act, and she's just the same as him, and they let the problem get out of control. And that woke agenda, that's her agenda. Here's her in her own voice talking about it. It's the smart play.
Right. So, in thinking of the effectiveness of the two campaigns and in thinking of that realignment from 2020, I'm wondering whom do you think were the most important constituencies in play? When you think of what happened in 2024, white men, white women, black men, Muslim Americans. There are many groups that are pointed to as
Yeah.
key.
Yeah. So
All the above?
I don't think there's been a realignment since 2020. 2016, 2020, 2024, those are the same elections.
Mm-hmm.
There's very, very little is changing.
Except people have left the Democratic Party since 2020.
Yes. A lot of that is due to the economy. It doesn't mean they're not coming back. Okay. So say Trump does his tariffs, he has a mass deportation, the economy looks a lot different in 3 years. Like, those people are coming back. So the realignment is from 2012. That's where the New Deal coalition is gone.
Right.
The identity-inflected coalition is here, and we're still sort of titrating people in and out of the two parties. And 2024 is a continuation of that. Now, you pointed to a bunch of groups, and for sure, people are going to know who are listening that there were massive changes in some groups, young people, the Latino population. Again, a lot of that's going to be the economy, but some of it is going to be conservatives in those groups doing what like white non-college educated voters have been doing for the last 15 years. I'm misaligned with the Democratic Party. I need to be voting for the other party. And that's been happening for a decade and a half, and it's still happening, and it's hitting these other parts of the population now.
So how fluid or stable is the Trump coalition? If tariffs produce disastrous effects in the American economy, is it likely to fall apart and lead to another realignment? Can that be imagined in 4 years?
No, we're not going back to the 2012
pre-2012
distribution.
The Obama coalition.
No, we're not going back. To quote Kamala Harris. But that doesn't mean that we know what's going to happen in every election, right? The two sort of major chunks of the electorate that are solid Democrats and solid Republicans, those things are in place, and those chunks are different than they were in the 1990s and the early 2000s. Right. The white non-college educated voters have left the Democratic Party. They've become Republicans. College educated voters have become Democrats. Okay. So the chunks are different, but the chunks are in place. And what is swinging these elections? Trump, Biden, Trump, possibly pick your favorite Democrat in 2028. Right. What's swinging the outcomes are the people on the margin. And it's always been that way. And those people are less interested in politics. They may not have a strong party identification. The economy, the state of the nation's economy, plays a role for them. And that's going to be changing. So could the economy tip people toward the Democrats in 2028? Absolutely. But that's not changing the state of who's voting for each of these parties.
Okay, as we move towards the end of this fascinating conversation, I want to ask you to do something other than what you normally do, which is describe trends as well as anybody in the United States, and think ahead, put on the prophets cap.
Okay.
What does the presidency of Trump 47 look like to you?
Well, no president is as effective as they hope they're going to be when they're campaigning. And so I don't think that his presidency will be different on that regard. He has said he's going to do a lot of things. It will be hard for him to do all those things. And that's just sort of history tells us that that's true. Now, I already know I'm getting emails from your listeners. Yeah, but he's unconstrained and he has a, do not go to jail card. And yes, all those things are true. But like, you still have to get it done. And the getting it done part is often also challenging. Whatever the worst case scenario is that you can imagine, it's not going to be that. But are we going to be in the same place? Is the federal government going to look the way it looks today when we get to 2027? No, I don't think it is. And so I do think there will be deregulation, as we talked about that a little earlier. There will be a reorganization of parts of the federal government. Is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, are they really going to make government more efficient? If that seems like a very tall task to me. If you told me pick two people who might be able to make that happen, those people might be on the list. But my guess is that that is not going to capture their imagination for very long. And they are not going to be working on it 24/7 for the next 3 years. And so will government be a little bit more efficient? Maybe, probably in the areas that they really care about. The real question is, what's the economy going to do during this next 4 years? Because that, when we get to, it's really 3 years, when we get to 2027, that is going to be a huge signal to Democrats about whether they should get into the nominating contest for president in 2028. If the economy is going gangbusters, your best candidates are probably going to sit that one out. I mean, it will be open, so there won't be an incumbent president running. And I do believe that's true.
You do? Okay.
I do.
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
I do. So that opens up, that is an indicator that if you're a high quality Democrat, open race, a race without an incumbent, that's a good race to get in. But if the economy's booming, you got to have something. Let's think about what you got to have. You got to have something to run on where you're on the popular side and public opinion is lopsided, and your opponent cannot take the same position as you. That is what you need. And we know that Democrats are on the wrong side of the policies we talked about earlier, what people call the woke agenda. Public opinion is lopsided. It is not on their side. So you need something else. And, I think that Josh Shapiro and Pete Buttigieg and, those are the two people who I have some insight into. I think they're very creative and very smart. And I have no doubt that they might be able to come up with something, some sort of agenda for American renewal, or, something that feels like the New Deal, but doesn't have the word new in it and doesn't have the word deal in it, right? So it needs to be, the new frontier. Like, this is exactly, we need to get into the 1960s thinking about our lives in a very different way. That's what they need, but it has to have a policy component to it. That's the challenge. If the economy is not growing, boy, is that 2028 will be a contest. The best and brightest Democrats will come out, and, that'll be fun.
Okay. Well, we'll no doubt have an opportunity to talk about that in a few years. But as always, this has been just an incredibly illuminating conversation. Thank you, Lynn Vavreck, for making time out of your extraordinarily busy schedule to be with us on Then and Now.
Thank you so much for having me. I could talk about presidential campaigns all day long. So I appreciate you cutting me off and not letting me go on forever. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Then and Now, a podcast by the UCLA Luskin Center for History and Policy. You can learn more about our work or share your thoughts with us at our website, luskincenter.history.ucla.edu. Our show is produced by David Myers and Rosalind Campbell, with original music by Daniel Reichman. Special thanks to the UCLA History Department for its support, and thanks to you for listening.